The streets of Cairo were alive with fire that night, as if the city itself had become a furnace. Smoke rose in black columns, blotting out the pale moon, and the air was thick with the tang of burning rubber and sweat. Protesters clashed with riot police in a storm of shouts, curses, and the metallic crack of tear gas canisters hitting pavement. Every few seconds, the sharp pop of gunfire broke the chaos, sending crowds scattering into shadowed alleys before surging back again. I was 20 years old, my name Muhammad, and I was already convinced I knew the truth about the world. A truth shaped by grief, sharpened into rage. My brother Isef had been my anchor, the one who could make our cramped apartment feel like a palace with nothing but his laughter. 2 years earlier, he was killed in a fight outside a church. The news called it a misunderstanding. I called it a wound that refused to heal. I told myself the Christians had taken him from me, and my heart hardened like stone. Every day, the television and my phone fed me more reasons to hate. News of bombings in Paris, attacks in Brussels, the nightclub shooting in Orlando. Each headline felt like proof that we were under attack, that my anger was righteous. I didn't see faces, only enemies. I didn't hear cries, only the roar of vengeance. Cairo pulsed with unrest. Torn posters of Mubarak fluttered on walls stained with soot. Men gathered in tea shops, speaking in hushed, bitter tones. At the mosque, sermons grew sharper, their edges honed against the whetstone of war. My own prayers were twisted, no longer petitions for peace but pleas for revenge. That night, I moved with a knot of young men through a side street slick with spilled oil. At the head was Hassan, broad-shouldered, scar running from temple to cheek, eyes always hard as flint. He didn't just speak, he ignited. His voice was gravel wrapped in fire as he told us about purifying the land, about defending honor with blood. When he spoke, I forgot the ache in my chest, forgot the softness in my mother's eyes when she whispered Isef's name. We ducked into an abandoned warehouse that smelled of rust and cigarettes. Maps and black flags covered the walls, lit by the flicker of a single bare bulb. Hassan leaned over the table, tracing a line with his finger. The path we'd take for the next operation. It wasn't about strategy anymore. It was about proving we were willing to go further than anyone else, willing to let hate carry us wherever it wanted. I remember gripping the handle of a jerrycan, feeling its cold weight in my palm. The fuel inside sloshed like a promise. I told myself I was doing it for Isef, that every flame I lit would be a torch in his honor. But deep down, under layers of anger, something else stirred, something I refused to acknowledge. When I got home that night, my mother was sitting by the window, her prayer beads coiled in her hand like a living thing. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. The silence between us was thick, and in it I could hear the unspoken question. What have you become? I passed her without a word, retreating to my room where Isef's empty bed still stood like a monument. Outside, the city was still alive. Horns blaring, voices shouting, the distant thud of another explosion. I sat on my mattress and scrolled through my phone. More headlines, more flames, more blood. In those moments, the world felt small and burning. A place where every street was an enemy's street, every stranger a potential threat. That was the night Hassan first asked me if I was ready to prove myself. His eyes locked on mine, daring me to flinch. I didn't, because at 20 years old, with the grief of my brother's death wrapped around my heart like barbed wire, I thought I had nothing left to lose. When I think back now, it's strange how quickly the lines blurred, how what once felt unthinkable became routine, almost ordinary. At first, my place in Hassan's group was just about listening, standing in the shadowed corners of meetings, absorbing the fever in their voices. They spoke of purity, of cleansing, of restoring honor. Words that sounded noble in the low light of that warehouse. Words that crumbled like ash when held up to the sun. We met in alleys littered with empty bottles, in half-collapsed buildings where dust danced in the beams of our flashlights. Hassan's voice was always the loudest, but it was the quiet approval of the older fighters that gave his words weight. They had scars to prove their commitment, pale lines across arms, missing fingers, limps from shrapnel wounds. They carried themselves like men who had been tested and found worthy. I wanted that worthiness. I wanted my pain to mean something. So when they spoke of Christians as invaders, of our neighborhoods as fortresses under siege, I nodded. I didn't question the pictures they painted. The markets in Baghdad after bombings, the twisted metal and broken glass in Mogadishu, all of it framed as proof that the fight was holy. Hassan paired me with Kareem, a tall, thin man with deep-set eyes and a voice so low you had to lean in to hear him. He taught me how to move without drawing attention, how to blend into a crowd until it was time to strike. We spent hours in the desert outskirts, the sun a burning coin above us, drilling with rusted rifles and machetes. The sand found its way into my mouth, my eyes, my lungs, but I told myself it was a small price to pay for becoming unshakable. Back home, life shrank into narrow corridors. My mother's gaze lingered on me longer each day, her lips moving in silent prayers. My father, a quiet mechanic with oil always under his nails, tried once to speak to me. "This isn't the way, Muhammad," he said, his voice careful but firm. I cut him off before he could finish. "You didn't see Isef's blood?" I spat, the bitterness burning my throat. He didn't try again. The first time Hassan sent me on a mission, it was small, delivering a message to a contact, nothing more. But the secrecy, the way people stepped aside when we passed, made my chest swell. By the second mission, I was carrying fuel. By the third, I was holding a lighter in my hand, watching flames leap across a church's wooden beams. I told myself I was avenging Isef, that each fire was a memorial. But there were moments, fleeting, almost invisible, when the conviction wavered. The sight of a child clutching her mother's skirt as they ran from the smoke. The way the air turned thick and hard to breathe, not just from the fire but from something heavier. I pushed those thoughts down, smothering them under the same anger that had carried me this far. In the warehouse, Hassan began to treat me differently. He'd clap a hand on my shoulder, call me brother, ask for my opinion in planning sessions. I started to wear the black scarf around my neck like the others. It wasn't just clothing, it was armor, an identity. Still, nights at home were harder. My mother's small acts of care, leaving bread on my table, mending my shirt, felt like accusations. I avoided her eyes, afraid that if I looked too long, the walls I'd built would crack. In the quiet, Isef's laughter echoed in my memory, unbidden and unwelcome. One evening, after a meeting where Hassan spoke about erasing the cross from our land, I walked home through the narrow streets of Mbaba. The air smelled of grilled corn and exhaust fumes. Somewhere in the distance, a TV blared news about another explosion overseas. I didn't hear all of it, but the words Kabul and casualties cut through the static. I told myself it was justice being done somewhere far away, but a part of me wondered why it never seemed to end. By the end of that year, I was no longer the boy who had stumbled into Hassan's circle. I was a man with calloused hands, a man who could pour fuel without his grip shaking, who could watch stained glass shatter without blinking. And yet, beneath the black scarf, the rage that had once burned so brightly was beginning, though I didn't know it then, to burn holes in me. The plan was simple. Hassan made sure of that. We would leave Cairo under cover of darkness, 2 vans loaded with fuel and Molotovs, knives strapped to our belts. The target, a small Coptic village on the edge of the Nile. The mission, torch their church, drive the families out, send a message they would never forget. I volunteered before he even finished speaking. The others looked at me with a kind of respect that felt like approval. I told myself this was for Isef, that every step I took brought me closer to making things right. We drove for hours, the city lights fading into the black stretch of desert road. Inside the van, no one spoke much, just the occasional cough, the metallic clink of a fuel can shifting, the rasp of a lighter being tested. I stared out the window, watching the stars tremble over the horizon. When we reached the village, it was quiet. Mud brick homes clustered together like they were huddling for warmth. The small church stood in the center, its cross catching a faint glint from the moon. To me, it looked like defiance. Hassan gave the signal. We moved quickly, breaking glass, throwing bottles, watching fire blossom against the walls. Flames licked up the wooden beams, and smoke began to curl into the night. Shouts filled the air. Men running, women crying, the sound of sandals slapping against the dirt. I kicked open the door of a home and saw them. A family of 4, huddled in the corner as the heat rose. The father had his arms around his wife and children, their eyes closed, voices rising together in a steady, unwavering prayer. The fire's light flickered across their faces, and in that moment, they looked unafraid. Something in me faltered. My grip on the fuel can loosened. I told myself to move, to finish the job, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. Their words, I couldn't understand them, were like a quiet stream running against the roar of fire and chaos. I turned away before anyone could see the hesitation in my eyes. We left as fast as we came. Hassan called it a success. The others laughed in the back of the van, their adrenaline spilling out in shouts and jokes. I said nothing, staring at my hands in the dim light. They smelled of smoke and petrol. That night in my room, sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, calm, even as the roof above them began to crack and groan under the heat. I reached for my phone, trying to drown the memory in the noise of the world. The news was full of it, not our raid but other acts. Images from Raqqa's ruined streets, the shattered Christmas market in Berlin, the chaos in New York when a truck had plowed through a crowd. I used to see those scenes as victories. Now they felt like echoes of what I'd just done. When I finally drifted into sleep, the dream came. A man in white stood before me, his eyes both gentle and piercing. Why do you persecute me? His voice rolled through me like thunder, shaking something loose inside. I woke with my heart pounding, sweat on my skin, the words still hanging in the dark. By morning, I was back in the warehouse, the smell of smoke still clinging to my clothes. Hassan was speaking, but I barely heard him. My mind kept drifting back, to the family, to the prayer, to the man in white whose voice seemed to know me. The crack had opened, and no matter how I tried, I couldn't close it again. The days after the raid felt heavier, as if Cairo's air had thickened. The warehouse still smelled faintly of smoke when we gathered, but no one spoke of the village. It was already another mission checked off, another small notch on the tally of our war. I tried to force myself into the rhythm of the group again, cleaning rifles, loading crates, following Hassan's barked commands, but something had shifted. My hands hesitated where they used to act without thought. My mind wandered when his voice demanded attention. One evening, after the others had left, I lingered in the warehouse's shadowed corners. I heard Hassan's voice in the adjoining room, low but sharp, talking about targeting children in the next raid. The words twisted in my stomach. For a moment, I felt like I was looking at him from the outside, as though I had stepped back from a man I had once followed without question. I left without a word, my steps pulling me deeper into Cairo's narrow backstreets. The noise of the city, honking cars, vendor shouts, the distant call to prayer, became a blur. That's when I saw it. A dusty little shop I'd passed 100 times but never noticed. Its window displayed a row of old books, their covers faded and edges curling. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of paper and mildew. My eyes fell on a small black book tucked between a stack of worn novels. The gold letters on the spine spelled Holy Bible. My pulse quickened. Without thinking, I reached for it, my hand trembling. The shopkeeper barely looked up as I slid a few crumpled notes across the counter. I tucked it under my shirt, the weight of it strange but somehow steadying. That night, I read by the faint glow of the bulb in my room, hidden under my blanket like a child with a secret. The words in Genesis spoke of a world shaped by a loving hand, a vision so unlike the world I had known that I almost laughed. And yet, something in me leaned toward it. Days later, I crossed paths with Amir in the crowded heart of the city. We had grown up in the same neighborhood, chasing footballs down dusty alleys, sharing scraps of bread on long afternoons. But now his beard was trimmed, his eyes calmer than I remembered. He greeted me with cautious warmth. "I heard about the raids," he said softly. I braced for judgment, but instead he added, "I've been praying for you." The words landed heavier than any accusation. We spoke briefly, our voices low amid the bustle of the street. I didn't tell him everything. Not yet. But when he invited me to meet again, I said yes. Our meetings became careful rituals. We'd find quiet spots, a bench in a neglected park, the corner of a cafe no one visited, sometimes his small apartment that smelled faintly of incense and old books. He showed me a Coptic Bible, the pages marked with slips of paper and notes in the margins. I read passages about forgiveness, about loving enemies, and felt the ground shift beneath me. One night, as rain tapped against the window, Amir read aloud from Matthew 5 verse 44. "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." The words cut through me. I thought of that family in the burning house, their voices steady in prayer, and felt an ache I couldn't name. In the warehouse, I kept my mask on. Hassan's gaze lingered longer now, his scar twitching when he spoke to me. "You're quiet these days," he said once, a warning in his tone. I forced a smile, pretending nothing had changed, but inside, everything had. At night, I found myself scrolling through news I used to consume with pride. The names of cities, Kabul, Baghdad, Mogadishu, no longer stirred a sense of brotherhood in war. They stirred grief. I saw mothers clutching children, streets strewn with broken glass, the dazed stares of survivors. The faces I once ignored now looked back at me, asking questions I couldn't answer. I hid the Bible better after that. Wrapped in an old shirt, it lived beneath the mattress where even my mother wouldn't find it. Her eyes followed me more closely these days, her hands moving over her prayer beads as if they could pull me back from a cliff she couldn't see. Weeks passed like this, my life divided in two. By day, I wore the black scarf, kept my voice steady, pretended I still belonged. By night, I read by lamplight, the words filling a part of me I hadn't realized was empty. The whisper that had started in the burning house was now louder, harder to ignore, and I began to wonder how much longer I could stand with one foot in each world before the ground gave way completely. The warehouse was hotter than usual that night. The old fan in the corner rattled uselessly, pushing around air heavy with cigarette smoke and the metallic tang of fuel. We were gathered close, Hassan at the center, his eyes sharp and restless. He paced like a caged animal, the scar on his cheek catching the flicker of the bulb overhead. "This next strike," he said, his voice low, "will make them remember us for generations. We go after the village school, teachers, children, all of them. No mercy." The words landed like a stone in my gut. Around me, some of the younger men grinned, their excitement barely contained. I kept my face still, but my mind was racing. The image of the Christian family praying in their burning home came back so vividly that I could almost smell the smoke. And now, Hassan was talking about burning a place filled with children. I nodded faintly, enough to avoid suspicion, but inside something snapped. I could follow him no further. When the meeting broke, I drifted toward the exit, careful to avoid his gaze. Outside, the air was cooler but no less heavy. The street lamps threw long shadows across the cracked pavement. I walked without a destination, my thoughts tangled and raw. Somewhere in the distance, a radio blared from an open window, carrying news from abroad. Another bombing in Baghdad, casualties mounting. Once, those headlines had felt like proof of a righteous fight. Now they sounded like an endless echo of the pain I had been part of creating. By the time I reached my neighborhood, I had made my decision. I would not be part of Hassan's plan. I would not harm children. The next afternoon, I met Amir in the narrow alley behind his building. He could see it in my face before I spoke. "You've decided," he said quietly. "I'm leaving," I told him. "I don't care what it costs." Amir's expression was solemn. "It will cost you everything. Your life, maybe. Your family." "I've already lost too much to this," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. We sat in his small apartment, the light dim, the air thick with incense. He opened his Bible but didn't read from it. Instead, he looked at me and said, "You have to be wise. You can't just disappear. They'll come after you." That night, I returned home and found my mother in her usual place by the window. The prayer beads moved slowly in her hands, her gaze distant. "Where have you been?" she asked. "With an old friend," I replied. Her eyes lingered on me for a long moment. She didn't press, but I could feel the question hanging in the air. Over the next few days, I kept up appearances at the warehouse. I nodded during Hassan's rants, carried crates, checked weapons. But inside, I was already gone. When he asked me to scout the school grounds alone, I said yes, knowing it was the perfect chance to disappear. I didn't go to the school. I went to Amir's instead. We talked late into the night, planning my escape. He knew of a safe house outside the city, a place where others who had left groups like ours were hiding. It wasn't much, just a few rooms, barred windows and locks on the doors, but it was away from Hassan. Before dawn, I packed a small bag, the Bible wrapped in an old shirt, a notebook filled with scribbled thoughts I hadn't been brave enough to speak, and the few clothes I owned that didn't smell of smoke. As I zipped the bag, my mother appeared in the doorway. Her eyes fell on the bag, then on me. "They'll kill you," she said, her voice shaking. "I know." She reached for my arm, her fingers trembling. "You're my son." I couldn't speak. I just hugged her, the first time in years, and felt her tears soak into my shirt. Then I stepped back, knowing I might never see her again. Outside, the streets were still dark. The city hushed before the first call to prayer. I walked quickly, keeping to the shadows, every sound behind me making my heart jump. When I reached Amir's building, he was waiting, the engine of his old car running. As I climbed in, I felt the strange mix of fear and relief settling in my chest. For the first time in years, I was moving toward something instead of away from it. We drove without speaking, the city falling behind us, the road stretching into the pale light of dawn. My hands tightened around the bag in my lap. I didn't know what waited ahead, only that I could not go back. And for the first time, that was enough. The safe house was small, its walls cracked, the air heavy with the smell of old wood and incense. Amir led me through the narrow hallway to a back room where a single candle burned. A man in long robes stood waiting, his face lined with age but lit with kindness. "This is Father Mark," Amir said quietly. The priest took my hand, his grip firm but gentle. "You've come far," he said, "and you've carried a heavy weight." I sat across from him, my bag at my feet. The Bible inside felt warm, as if it knew where I had brought it. "I've done things," I began, my voice shaking. "Raids, burnings. I dragged a girl from her home while she prayed. I thought it was justice, but it was only hate. I don't know if I can be forgiven." Father Mark didn't look away. "God sees the heart, Muhammad. He knows where you've been, and he knows where you're willing to go now." I didn't realize I was crying until my vision blurred. For so long, I had carried those memories like chains. To speak them out loud was to loosen them link by link. When he asked if I wanted to be baptized, I hesitated only a moment before nodding. The basin was small, the water cool against my skin as he poured it over my head. "You are forgiven," he said, and the words sank deeper than anything I had ever heard. I felt the weight lift. Not all at once, but enough that my chest felt light, my breath easier. When it was over, Amir wrapped a towel around my shoulders. I sat for a while in the stillness, the flicker of the candle painting the walls in gold. For the first time in years, my hands weren't shaking. But peace didn't follow me home. I arrived at my parents' apartment with the sun still low. My mother met me at the door. One look at my face and her expression hardened. "What have you done?" "I've left the group," I said. "I've been baptized." Her prayer beads slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a hollow sound. "You've shamed us," she whispered, tears rising in her eyes. My father appeared behind her, his face like stone. "Leave," he said, his voice flat but burning. "You are no son of mine." The door closed behind me with a finality that made my knees weak. I wandered the streets for hours, the city's noise like a wave crashing over me. Vendors shouting, car horns blaring, the call to prayer echoing from a dozen directions. But beneath it all was a new sound, quiet but steady, the voice from my dream. "Why do you persecute me?" Amir found me by nightfall, sitting on a bench outside a shuttered shop. He took me back to the safe house, where the shadows felt more like protection than prison. The threats began almost immediately. Notes slid under the door in jagged handwriting. "Apostate. You will die." Once, late at night, I spotted a man standing across the street, his face shadowed, watching the building. Hassan called my phone once. His voice was low and cold. "You've betrayed us. We will find you." Then he hung up. I didn't sleep much after that. Some nights, I'd read until the candle burned low. Others, I'd sit by the window, staring out at the narrow street, listening for footsteps that didn't belong. The news reached me even in hiding. Reports of violence from places I had once admired for their defiance. Baghdad markets turned to rubble, Mogadishu streets littered with debris after an explosion. They no longer felt like victories. They felt like warnings, reminders of the life I had escaped and the lives still trapped inside it. Father Mark visited when he could. We'd sit in the dim back room of the safe house, his voice steady as he read scripture. One afternoon, he read from 2 Corinthians 5 verse 17. "If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has gone, the new is here." I wanted to believe it, and in some moments I did. But the shadows outside the window reminded me that the old life hadn't fully let go. Still, when I closed my eyes at night, I didn't see the flames or the broken glass anymore. I saw water pouring over my head, washing away the soot that had settled into my soul. And I knew, no matter what it cost me, there was no going back. The safe house was never meant to be permanent, but weeks turned into months. The barred windows and peeling paint became as familiar as my own hands. The danger outside was real, but inside those walls, something new was growing. Amir introduced me to others who had walked the same road I had. Men whose eyes carried the same shadows, whose hands shook when they spoke of the things they had done. We met in hushed gatherings, sometimes in the safe house, other times in the dim back rooms of cafes where the music was loud enough to drown our voices. It started with conversations, stories whispered over cups of tea. We spoke of raids and bombings the way old men speak of accidents, with the weight of something that could never be undone. But as the days passed, those talks shifted. We began asking different questions. What now? Who do we become after this? I began recording my story. At first, it was just for myself, a way to get the words out, to make sense of them. But Amir suggested sharing them with others in hiding. We used encrypted channels, sending short voice messages and grainy videos. My voice was low and steady, telling of the man I had been and the grace that had found me. To my surprise, people responded. A man from another city wrote, "I thought I was the only one. You've given me hope." A young woman said she had been raised in a militant household and was secretly looking for a way out. Each message felt like a small light in the dark. One evening, Amir brought a man named Hadi to the safe house. His left hand was scarred, 2 fingers missing. We sat across from each other in the flickering light of the single bulb. "I killed 2 men, Hadi said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trying to forget their faces for years." I nodded. "You don't have to forget, but you can be forgiven." He looked at me for a long time before tears filled his eyes. We prayed together, our hands clasped. The room so quiet I could hear the candle wax crackling. In those moments, I realized this was my purpose. Not just to run from the past, but to walk with others who were trying to leave it behind. The threats didn't stop. A note was shoved under the door one night, the letters sharp and deliberate. "Apostate, your time is coming." We doubled our caution, changing meeting places often, keeping our circle tight. Still, the work continued. I reached out to more people through secure messages, connecting them to Amir's network. Some I never met in person. Others I sat with in secret corners, watching the fear in their eyes slowly loosen its grip. Then came the letter. It was late afternoon when Amir handed it to me. The handwriting was neat, careful. My hands shook as I opened it. "I was the girl you took from her home during the raid. I prayed for you that night. I forgive you." The words blurred as my eyes filled. I had imagined her face so many times. The terror, the tears, but never this. Forgiveness. Not from someone far away, not as an abstract idea, but from the very person I had wronged. I pressed the paper to my forehead, my chest tightening with something I could barely contain. I wept until my voice was gone, until the light outside faded into night. Later, I sat by the window, looking out over the street. Somewhere beyond this city, beyond this country, there were people living in fear, in anger, in hate, just as I once had. Places like Marawi, Manchester, Baghdad, Paris. I had once thought of them as battlefields in a war without end. Now I saw them as cities full of families who wanted nothing more than to live, to breathe, to pray in peace. I knew then that this work could never stop. Even if the threats came every day, even if I had to move from safe house to safe house for the rest of my life, it would be worth it. The next morning, I recorded a new message. My voice was steady, the words simple. I was lost in hate, but love found me. If you are ready to leave, you are not alone. There is a way out, and there is forgiveness waiting for you. I sent it, knowing it might reach someone on the edge, someone whose hands were still stained with smoke, whose heart was still chained by rage. And maybe, just maybe, it would be the voice they needed to hear. By the time I reached Spain, the air felt different in my lungs. It wasn't just the sea breeze rolling in from the coast or the cool dampness after rain. It was the absence of constant fear. Amir's network had arranged a small flat for me, bars on the windows more out of habit than necessity. For the first few days, I barely left. But then the invitations came. First, a small Bible study at a church tucked between narrow streets. Then, a request to speak before a congregation. The idea made my chest tighten, but I knew it was time. The church was modest, the walls whitewashed, the wooden pews worn smooth by years of hands and prayers. As I stepped to the front, every eye turned to me. My voice trembled at first, but I let the truth carry me. I spoke of Cairo's burning streets, of ISF's death, of the warehouse meetings thick with smoke and hate. I told them about the raids, the Christian family who prayed as their home burned, the dream of the man in white asking, "Why do you persecute me?" I spoke of the Bible hidden under my mattress, of Amir's quiet faith, of the water that washed me clean in Father Mark's hands. There were tears in the pews, but no judgment in their faces, only a warmth I had once thought impossible. After the service, a man approached me in the courtyard. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his 20s, with eyes that had seen too much. "I'm Hadi," he said, his voice unsteady. "I left the group because of your messages." We sat on a stone bench beneath an orange tree. He told me of his own acts, his own nightmares, and the moment he realized he could not keep living that way. "You showed me it was possible to walk away," he said, gripping my hand. It was the same hand I had once used to light fires, to break doors, to pull people from their homes. Now it was a bridge, connecting me to someone who had found the same grace. Weeks later, another letter arrived. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the first line stopped me cold. "My name is Daniel. I was from the village you raided. I lost my home that night, but I have not lost my faith. I forgive you." I read it twice, then a third time, before setting it down and covering my face with my hands. My sobs came quietly, like rain on a still night. That evening, I walked through the rain-soaked streets of the city. The shop windows glowed, casting reflections across the wet cobblestones. I thought of all the places I had once seen as points on a map of war: Kabul, Berlin, Raqqa, New York. I had measured them by the destruction that touched them. Now I saw them as homes to people whose laughter and prayers were as real as my own. I knew the danger wasn't gone. The group's reach was long, and the threats would likely follow me for the rest of my life. But fear no longer dictated my steps. Grace did. On my final Sunday in that church, I stood once more before the congregation. My voice was steady this time, carrying not just confession but conviction. I was a persecutor. I burned, I destroyed, I hated. But Jesus Christ found me, stopped me, and called me to himself. If he can forgive me, he can forgive anyone. No one is too far gone. No one is beyond his reach. I looked across the faces in the pews, seeing not strangers but brothers and sisters. If this story has touched you, don't leave unchanged. Come to him. Return to the Gospels, to the truth, to the one who can take the ashes of your life and make something beautiful. I stand here as proof, living proof, that his grace is stronger than our darkest sins. When I stepped down, the pastor embraced me. The choir began to sing softly, the melody rising through the church like a prayer carried on the wind. And as I sat in the back, my head bowed, I realized I wasn't just telling my story anymore. I was living my calling. From the burning streets of Cairo to this moment in a rain-washed Spanish courtyard, my journey had been one long road from hate to love, and I knew the rest of my days would be spent helping others take that same road. Because grace doesn't just save us, it sends us.